All right, so this is Unit 7. This is on learning. This is video 2. Make sure you title it Classical Conditioning Part 1. The next two videos are going to focus on classical conditioning. So video 2, Part 1, and video 3, Part 2. So this unit is focusing on learning, and learning is a relatively permanent change in an organism's behavior due to some sort of experience. There are three different learning theories. The first one we've talked about in class is the social cognitive learning theory. The next one we're going to talk about is classical conditioning. So, how do we learn? We learn one way through associations. Association is when learning occurs that certain events occur together. These events may be stimuli or it can be a response and its consequence. So an example of associative learning where two things occur together, think about lightning and thunder. You see lightning, you expect thunder. Another associative learning is you see scantrons and you expect test. So you're anticipating two things occurring together. Conditioning is the process of learning where you're connecting these two things. So there's two different types of conditioning, operant conditioning and classical conditioning. This video will be spent looking at classical conditioning. So, what is classical conditioning? Classical conditioning is a type of learning in which one learns to link two or more stimuli together and anticipate events. It's often involuntary, and it's based off of our reflexes, so some things that we can't control. Okay, so involuntary would be something like blinking, sneezing, okay? Another one would be something like shouting out or screaming out uncontrollably. Who's credited with classical conditioning? Ivan Pavlov was born in 1849, died in 1936, and was credited with discovering classical conditioning. He is one of the most famous psychologists in history, up there with Albert Bandura, who we just learned about. He was actually a Russian physiologist who was studying the digestive tract of dogs. He was not a psychologist. When he was studying the digestive tract, he came across an incidental discovery, okay? Something that he didn't expect. And he set up an experiment, and his experiment became known as the classical conditioning experiment of 1899. He laid the framework for early psychologist John B. Watson, and he actually received a Nobel Peace Prize in his early research in 1904. So let's talk a little bit about his experiment. So, first thing that happens is when you present a dog with food, it's going to start to salivate. You put a cheeseburger in front of me, I'm going to start to salivate. Okay? So, he was studying the salivation and how much dogs would salivate. So, Pavlov would be there. Okay, the first time he met the dog, and he noticed that the dog didn't salivate at him. It was a person. Okay, and over time, every day, Pavlov would start to bring the dog food. So Pavlov would be present, food would be there, dog would start to drool. Pavlov, food, dog would start to drool. Pavlov, food, dog would start to drool. So he was able to start to measure with this experiment. Soon, however, what he uncovered was Pavlov would just show up and the dog would start to drool. He would get frustrated because he was unsure why the dogs were just salivating at him till he started to link the two together. So he tested his experiment where he would present a dog with food, which was known as the unconditioned stimulus, would cause the dog to salivate. Pretty natural. Food's going to cause you to salivate. He then tried to see if a bell would cause a dog to salivate. So this was the neutral stimulus. And the bell would not cause the dog to salivate. So no salivation took place. So what he tried to do is he was going to pair these two together. The neutral stimulus didn't cause salivation with the food that did. And he would ring the bell, present the food, the dog would salivate. Ring the bell, present the food, dog would salivate. Ring the bell, present the food, the dog would salivate. Pretty soon, he started to just ring the bell and the dog would salivate, which then became known as the conditioned stimulus. So let's break down some of these words. Again, I would draw this with all the labels on it. So first thing that you need to know is First thing you need to know is what is the conditioned stimulus, unconditioned stimulus. So the unconditioned stimulus, or the unlearned stimulus, also known as the UCS, is a stimulus that unconditionally or naturally, automatically triggers a response. So it causes a natural response. Food is going to naturally cause you to respond. Water, if I threw it at you, is naturally going to cause you to jump. A loud noise is naturally going to cause you to jump. Pollen, naturally going to cause you to sneeze. So these are some examples, of unconditioned stimuluses that could be out there. Then you have the unconditioned response, the UCR. This is the unlearned response because of the naturally occurring response to the unconditioned stimulus, the UCS. Such as, you're going to salivate when you have food. That's a natural response that takes place. Okay? It's an unlearned reflex or response, no training occurs. So what you then start to do for the experiment is you're going to add a neutral stimulus, which was the bell, with the unconditioned stimulus, which was the food. Pair those enough time, and you're going to elicit a response. So you have the neutral stimulus, which is also becomes the conditioned stimulus. So you have NS and CS, which are the same. So an originally neutral stimulus that after an association with an unconditioned stimulus comes to trigger a conditioned response. So in this case, it would be the bell. It became a trained stimulus, a learned stimulus. So then you have the conditioned response. Conditioned response is a learned response to a previously neutral but now conditioned stimulus. So it's the CR, and that's salivation. Usually the UCR and the CR are the same. It's the trained response. So again, lots of vocabulary. I would make sure I maybe watch it a couple times to get the vocabulary down, but UCS, UCR, CS, CR can be kind of confusing. All right, so let's take a look at an example. When we're looking at examples of this, I always write this template down. UCS, UCR, CS, CR. Judy was taking a hot shower in a community shower at her college. The building is old and all the pipes are connected. One of her roommates was going to the bathroom and flushed the toilet. The water in the shower became so icy cold it causes her to jump back. Later that week, she was in the shower and again the toilet was flushed and the water became cold, causing her to jump back. Now, just hearing the toilet causes her to jump back. Okay, so I always tell my students to start with the response. The response is the same. Okay, so what did Judy do? Yeah, she was in the shower. But what did she do? She jumped back. So if I needed to fill this in, I would say jumping back would be the reflex. So then I always look at what caused her to jump back the first time. Well, it's not the toilet flushing. If I flushed the toilet right now, you wouldn't jump. However, if I threw cold water on you, you would jump. So the water would be the UCS. And then now the toilet flushing would be the thing that gets conditioned to jump back. Okay. Remember, the CS is also the NS, the neutral stimulus. If I flush the toilet right now, you would not jump back. All right, so a lot of information I know. Okay, make sure maybe you go over it a couple times. We'll go over examples like this in class, but that gives you a pretty good basis.